Welcome to episode 4 of Dreamcatchers. I'm Lex Napa, here with Norma Golightly, creator of the Angry Ambisextress blog and the Killjoy Agenda podcast, a queer feminist attack on all things unfair.
Yep.
Really happy to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you driving all the way out here. For those of you who don't know, we're in Boston, and the snow is just
Crazy.
Incredible right now. So I really appreciate you taking your time to come.
Absolutely. This seemed like such a cool project. When I first heard about it, I definitely wanted to get involved. So
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the first question I have for you before we get into talking, just let's break down the name, the Angry Ambisextress. I feel like there's a lot there. I feel like there's a story there. So why don't you tell me about that?
There definitely is. So I am from Long Island, a very homogenous community. It's like a weird red pocket in a blue state. And then when I went to Emerson College for college, that's when I first came out as bi and started becoming more comfortable, kind of like being myself, talking to other queer people and connecting there. And then when I went back to Long Island on breaks and everything after school, I realized just how different it was there. Like, people are so close-minded and they very much see things one particular way, and it made me very upset. Yeah. So I'm going back and forth between this super inclusive, understanding, tolerant community and this one that's filled with people who aren't bad people, but they just have never taken the time to look at certain things a certain way. That made me very upset. So the ambisextress part has to do with being bi, so kind of like ambidextrous, both ways. But the angry is just how upset I am, realizing that there are so many people out there who aren't necessarily actually bigoted or sexist or racist, but they live in a certain pocket of privilege that they've never thought to step outside. So when I was thinking about how to respond to that was the way that I felt. And it's funny too, because right now I'm not interested in men anymore. I'm kind of only dating women. Yeah. So it's weird to have attached that name to this blog. That being said, it's queer, it's intersectional, it's supposed to encapsulate everybody. But a huge part of what I and the blog are about is self-criticism and evolution and learning from your own past mistakes and allowing other people to see you evolve instead of acting like you didn't used to feel a certain way, because that's alienating also, to act like, well, now I get it, I didn't before, and not acknowledge that as part of your identity and part of your journey to becoming who you are and what you represent.
Right.
So on the one hand, I'm like, oh, that's awkward. Like, now I don't really feel that bi. But at the same time, it's like, that is who I was when I came up with this in June. And then that kind of reflects the whole community that I'm trying to get involved. And the whole angry thing can be a turnoff to people. But at the same time, what we say in the introduction to the podcast, the Killjoy Agenda, is we're angry and we have every right to be, but we're not here to yell. We're here to teach and to learn as much as possible. So it's kind of, I want people to not be afraid of that anger, but to see where it comes from and think of things that they are angry about as well, and then, contribute their own reactions and reflections on what's going on in the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to be able to kind of put it back on your audience and to say, we're not here to preach, we're not here to yell, like, we're here to kind of own up to our own privilege and to make sure that other people are kind of holding to that standard as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so I know you're familiar with the angry feminist trope.
Yes.
The feminazi, if you will. I hate that word, but it's a word that's often used to describe, this certain, stereotype. And I see in your podcast, you're just kind of embracing that angry feminist and kind of claiming that part, adding it into identity. And how do you feel you negotiate that? Because I'm sure there are a lot of people who really resonate, like a lot of us are angry.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are a lot of people who might feel alienated by that approach. So how does your podcast, try to grapple with that?
So we try to be as objective as possible. That's the whole point. The point of it is for it to be educational. So, like, the name of the podcast is the Killjoy Agenda. Yeah. Because same thing, I decided to completely embrace it. Like, people, the feminist killjoy joke, the concept of a feminist agenda, I have one. And it is super intersectional and inclusive, and I just think, I don't know, I want everybody involved. I want everyone to be equal. It's very optimistic and naive, but I'm going to make as many steps toward equality as possible. And what's frustrating is, like, that's all that feminism means. It just means the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. And I would expand on that to say, and the races, and everyone of different abilities, and everybody. But there's this stigma attached to it. The whole bra burning thing is another thing that I hate that people say.
Right.
And again, I feel like that stereotype comes from a lot of ignorance. It comes from people being scared of being yelled at or told that they're wrong. Mm-hmm. And I also think that the feminists who do, or people who claim to be feminists, who do present themselves that way, again, have every right to be angry, but they're probably not coming across the best way that they possibly could.
Yeah.
So we try to both embrace it, again, acknowledging we have every right to be angry, but at the same time, we're not yelling at you. But we do get kind of passionate. Like there are times when we'll literally be yelling on the podcast. It's also super uncensored. Because we're trying to, the ultimate goal, and again, we have a couple episodes out, we're still figuring ourselves out, but the ultimate goal is to express that anger in as not alienating of a way as possible by kind of making a joke out of the things that upset us. So pointing out, like we're doing a romantic comedy series right now called You Had Me at Hell No because of February. So we're trying to point out the things that are damaging stereotypes in those movies and the abusive and stalking behavior that you see in those movies all the time.
Yeah.
In such a way that it's so obvious, that it's so glaringly wrong, that when we're angry, the listener gets angry too, but not in a furious, uncomfortable way. In a, wow, that doesn't make sense. I'm also upset about it. But since they're laughing about it and like handling it in a certain way, I can both have my anger and make my plan to make things better and not just be like a downer all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're definitely trying to reclaim it and trying to put as positive of a spin on it as possible. But it is frightening because I don't want people who voted for Trump without understanding what that actually meant would be my ideal listener or reader. Someone who didn't examine their own privilege, who voted on a single issue and didn't realize they were throwing everybody under the bus, that's who I would love to educate and speak to. But that's the kind of person who would also likely be turned off by the name.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a catch-22, but I've been doing a lot. I was out last weekend, ended up talking to a Trump supporter who's like in his late 20s, works at a bank, like was saying all these sexist things, ridiculous things. And we're at a bar and I was like, what do you think feminism means? And it turned into this whole conversation. And this other guy who I honestly made the rude assumption was like his friend, actually jumped in. I was like, because he said, oh, well, men and women are fundamentally different. And I was like, have you ever read Delusions of Gender? How Our Mind, Society, and Neurosexism Create Difference by Cordelia Fine? Or have you heard of it? And another guy was like, yeah. And I thought he was like making fun of me. And then he jumps in and takes over the conversation and starts backing me up and explaining to his friend, like, no, there actually aren't these differences. And it's all stereotype effect and priming and blah, blah, blah. So actually interacting with people in person, like Obama encouraged everybody to do at the end of his term, has been super effective. And then he was like, okay, well, I'll check it out then.
Yeah.
So it's annoying that it has to like come with a preamble, but I want to both own the anger and try to do something good with it.
Right. And do you think your experience growing up in that red pocket kind of prepares you to, I don't know, better have these conversations with people?
Definitely. Because I think that a lot of what happened, like you think about Hillary Clinton and the whole basket of deplorables thing.
Yeah.
And again, this was supposed to be a pop culture criticism project, and it's become so political, but that's fine, because organically that's what needed to happen. But yeah, when you think about her saying that basket of deplorables comment, that is such a way to turn off so many people who already didn't think that she spoke for them. And hearing the way, there's actually a segment on Bill Maher's show where he's like, well, they are deplorable. I call them deplorable and I have no problem with that. But that's the issue, because no one's going to listen to you if you're just attacking them.
Yeah.
And having gone back and forth from Long Island to Emerson, I've heard both sides attack each other in these extremely not productive and sometimes honestly immature ways.
Yeah.
So like at the Women's March in New York, I was so frustrated because I saw so many signs like calling Trump a Cheeto or like things like that. And I was like, you could have put a political slogan on there. Like maybe the levity was nice compared to all the other heavy signs, and I see the joke that you're making, but you are giving them fodder to think that we're wrong. Like if you're representing a larger social movement and you're doing it in like a fatuous or immature or not productive way, then it's easier for the other people to turn you into a straw man and make that argument against you. So yeah, so I think that having experience hearing the good and the bad ways that each of those sides communicate with each other and refuse to communicate has definitely prepared me for that. That being said, while I am queer and I am a woman, so a lot of these issues affect me personally, I am also white and cis and super femme. So I realize there are so many conversations that I shouldn't be having. I'm not a spokesperson, and being a good ally a lot of the times means sitting down and shutting up and pointing toward the voice that should be showcased instead. Yeah. So that's why I came up with it, but I am completely anonymous. I don't use my real name. My co-host on the podcast doesn't use her real name. And I am constantly seeking contributors from all over the world, but mostly America,
right.
who have anything to say about how gender and sexuality and sex and sexual politics have affected their lives, because it's in everything. Mm-hmm. And it's a social construct, so it's not inherent, but it's endemic. And I want as many voices as possible, because I'm just one person, and I'm going off of what I've read and my personal experiences, and I acknowledge my privilege 100% and want to use it for good as much as I can.
Yeah.
So I do think that experience has made me kind of qualified to talk to both, mm-hmm. but I'm also always trying to find other voices to share with both sides instead of my own.
Yeah, and I think that is a great thing also for inclusivity and intersectionality in feminism, because I think another trope that comes along with the angry feminist is the angry 1970s white feminist.
Yes.
And I've listened to your podcast, and I think it's great how you're really paying attention to intersectionalities, not just of race, but sexuality and, all of these different issues and how they tie together. So in one way, you are embracing that anger, because in a way, a lot of people right now are angry, and you're right, it's very political. And you're also including voices that were once barred from that, feeling that anger. So, I applaud the work you're doing. It's good work. So what has your relationship been with feminism? So kind of take me back to that town in Long Island and talk to me about that.
So this is really funny. I've always been super political, always.
Yeah.
I come from a conservative Christian home. Mm-hmm. And I remember literally being on the bus in 4th grade yelling about Iraq with people. We were always super involved. So what's weird about being in a red part of a blue state is that the conservatives from where I'm from are extremely privileged. It's the North Shore of Long Island, people in these enormous beach houses, literally driving Hummers, and then loving George W. Bush and later hating Obama. Mm-hmm. And they're very disconnected, and it's predominantly white. There are a lot of Eastern European transplants because Stony Brook University is right there. So there is a large population of international people, but they still kind of end up glomming onto this strange mentality. So the weird part about them is, since the rest of New York is so democratic, they still feel threatened all the time.
Yeah.
So they are the majority in their area, and they have all of the means and whatever they want, and they still feel threatened all the time. So growing up among that, it was very easy to follow the conservative argument that marginalized communities are overreacting or whining or begging for attention or awards that they don't need.
Yeah.
And I took every AP history and government class. I was the speaker of the House of our Model Congress. I was Model UN, everything. Mm-hmm. And I had this weird libertarian thing going on, but then would also play devil's advocate in super liberal discussions. I did not identify as a feminist because I had the wrong impression of what it was.
Yeah.
Completely. And I thought it was the whole whining thing, and didn't understand, this is when I had heard the bad side of the myth of the welfare queen and hadn't understood the actual politics at play and the history behind things like that. Mm-hmm. So I was one of those who's like, oh, I don't need feminism, thinking it didn't make sense. And then going to Emerson and finding out what it actually was and what it means, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm definitely that.
Yeah.
So when I came back, I would see people from high school and they're like, what's different? How are you? And I'd be like, oh, I'm a big feminist now. And one of my friends said to me, you were always a huge feminist. I was like, what? He's like, you didn't say it, but the way that you talked and how you have always carried yourself in arguments, you always were.
Yeah.
But I really didn't think that. And I've also never once taken a women or gender studies class at all. Mm-hmm. I've just done a lot of independent reading. And again, being in a school where I'm interacting with people who are trans, where people of color who come from different backgrounds and who have different sexualities, and what that means in different communities that they're also a part of, was just kind of this very real life on the street learning. So I was 100% feminism is dumb. I thought it was hating men. I thought it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And now the more I read about it, the more ridiculous I think it is that not everybody identifies as one. Mm-hmm. And I think we should all be feminists. The Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie TED Talk and book, and her TED Talk, Dangers of a Single Story, I watched in college, just on my own, and I was like, wow. Yeah. This makes so much sense. How does not everybody think like this? And then I realized it comes from defensiveness all the time. People who are privileged feel like their core is being attacked when you're just acknowledging the context that they've grown up in. And it's like, no, it's not an attack on you that you benefit from these societal structures, but use those benefits to help amplify the voices of others and just be a more inclusive person. Like, it's not an attack. So we have a right to be angry because people don't get that.
Right.
But also try not to yell at them. So yeah, it was a weird evolution for me, kind of later in life.
Yeah.
And now it's one of those things, once you notice it, it's everywhere.
Yep. You can't unsee it once you see it. Exactly. Yeah, and I feel that too, coming from a conservative Christian background in upstate New York, so in a historically just kind of red rural town. It takes a lot longer for people, I think, maybe like us, to come to that conclusion. Like, oh, this is what feminism is. It's not, what's been spouted by all these people around us all these years, and what I was one. Like, it's a really great realization, and I think it prepares you to be able to see both sides, like we were saying, to acknowledge that, a woman who says, oh, I'm not feminist, isn't, that's not a slap in the face. That's not something to immediately jump on her about, but it's something that you went through, but just a while ago. So seeing it from the perspective of helping someone else through that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I always start when people, because I used to shy away from it. Like, people would see me, I was working as a hostess over the summer, so I'd be reading my books and, like, taking notes, like, under the counter. Yeah. People like, oh, is that homework? I'd be like, no, I'm just doing it. They'd be like, what's for? I'd be like, I run a blog, And then I was like, wait, why am I doing that? I was like, I run a feminist blog. And then seeing how people react, they're like, oh, weird, And then it just turned into, well, what do you think feminism is? And I have had that conversation hundreds of times now with people who then will later, like, email me or text me, be like, oh my God, I just saw something that reminded me of that conversation. Or, oh, I'm evolving. And that's why I came up with it, because after college, I got really political on Facebook. I was sharing articles, memes, whatever. Yeah. And random people from high school just started messaging me. Literally, like, I'm witnessing sexual harassment at my job. Like, a straight, white, loudly conservative, when we were in high school, man said that. I'm witnessing sexual harassment. How do I respond to this? What do I do? Someone reached out to me. Someone at our high school was raped. We're trying to write a letter to the superintendent to figure out how to handle it, whatever. And all these people kept messaging me because, they just didn't have that kind of, like, a source of information like that on their regular news feeds, I guess. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I should just consolidate all of this into a blog and get all of their personal stories and everything too. But yeah, like, I just started, like, living out loud, Right. And completely owning it. And now everything has been better. I feel better, like, going out and not having to be like, oh, well, when they say an offensive joke, I'll just wait until the next joke. Like, I call people out constantly, but I try to not be annoying or preachy. I try to be like, dude, like, that's actually not funny. Like, there was something happened at a job that I was working a couple of weeks ago where basically it's a lot of women. We all synced up. There's also a lot of teen moms. So I ended up buying a box of tampons for the staff because it made sense, and we needed it. And I put it in the bathroom and I tell everybody that it's there. And they're like, oh, thank you, blah, blah, blah. And I wrote, like, in case of lady emergency, like, on the bag that it came in. Abundantly clear what that's for. And someone who works with us went in and within, like, 48 hours put a coat hanger in the bag.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Like, and everyone was like, oh my God, that's so bad, but, like, still laughing. And I became the feminist killjoy, walking around being like, that's not funny at all. And everyone was like, oh, lighten up. And this was after the election too. I was like, you realize people actually die from this procedure, and it shouldn't be a problem in the developed world, but it will if legislators are getting what they want, if they're whatever. So just situations like that, it would have been so much easier to swallow that discomfort and just, like, be like, oh my God, like, I work with people who suck. But instead being vocal and calling them out on it and being like, that's not funny. And it sucked too because it was a really nice guy who did it. Like, not even one of the people who generally, like, makes us uncomfortable or anything like that. Right. So that was just a bummer.
Yeah, but I feel like we're almost trained in a way to just kind of swallow that and to go, haha, and to pass it off. I mean, that's part of what the patriarchy is. It's making women complicit just as much as men. So being able to stand up and say, like, hey, that's not funny, and to do it in a way that, isn't super aggressive or, attacking them directly, their personality, in a way that they might be able to come around to see why it was wrong. I think that's so needed. Yeah, because everyone will do that. They'll do the ad hominem attacks, or they'll write people off. They'll be like, oh, you believe that? Well, then I have no interest in talking to you. Yeah. Like, I even said earlier, like, about a year ago, I was like, wear a Trump t-shirt. I was like, if you support him, wear a t-shirt, because then I know not to talk to you. And I said that multiple times, and I've evolved past that, saying,
then I know I need to talk to you and see where that's coming from and what you think that represents. Because again, half the time people will say, oh, I'm not a racist, I'm not this, and they won't mean it, they won't understand, or they actually won't feel that way, but they just haven't done their research, or they have these skewed perspectives. And what you said is absolutely correct, and especially about, just women being complicit and women being silenced and just thinking that's just how it goes, especially because the majority of white women voted for this man.
Right.
We need to be, as white women, we need to be doing something about it.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah. So I can clearly see your passion in politics here. We've had such a great conversation, and I just want to make sure we've got time to ask, who were your role models growing up? I mean, who inspired you to kind of break the mold and live out loud?
So the funny thing is, my mother would not self-identify as a feminist. Again, just because hasn't really investigated it much. But she is amazing. She has always worked a million different part-time jobs. She is a math tutor at a college and privately. She tutors out of the house. She also she used to paint things and sell things, or paint in people's homes, make jewelry and sell it. She made ponchos when that was a thing. She does everything. And then on top of that, there was always like a warm home-cooked meal every single night, super healthy. She's a personal trainer. She teaches classes at the gym, and she reads more than anybody that I know. Like, this woman has more hours in the day than everybody else somehow. So it's weird. She actually really inspired me without either of us realizing it for a long time, because our actual interests are different. But I'm just a huge nerd, just like she is, read just as much as she does, and all of that. But in terms of having like any outspoken feminists around me, there were none. I'm not exaggerating. There were literally none. Yeah. There was one teacher at my high school who everybody like made fun of for how liberal she was. And it was actually in her English class that I read Reading Lolita in Tehran, which I forget the author right now, but that was an extremely important book. It's so cool. It's like it's half memoir, half analysis of banned books in Iran, and it's really fascinating. And it's written by a university professor who starts a secret book club with her students after the revolution. All this crazy stuff is going on. But recently, Andy Zeisler is one of the co-founders of Bitch Media, which started as a zine and now has become a website. They have podcasts, they have everything.
Yeah.
They're the best. And she wrote a book, We Were Feminists Once, From Riot Girl to Cover Girl, The Buying and Selling of a Political Movement. I mention it on my podcast every 30 seconds, and it is a really, really great introduction to all of this, to pop culture, politics, everything that, and then an evolution of it. You realize how, it started with the Hays Code in the 1930s and how that affects the sitcoms that are on TV today. So yeah, growing up, nobody around. I want to be like my mom and do a million things, and here I am.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely reading her work, Zeisler's, and seeing how that zine evolved into this whole thing was so cool. And also Cracked, the website Cracked, and Jack O'Brien, who founded Cracked, his whole trajectory career-wise and the incredible community he's been able to gather is awesome.
Yeah, I know it's almost becoming a theme with the people that I'm interviewing, is not everyone has, these really strong role models growing up in, situations that they grew up in that, are less than ideal a lot of the time. So having, these outside sources that you can point to for someone who might be listening like you, I think is really great. And kind of on that topic, what is your advice for young people hoping to follow their passions, whether it's a passion for podcasting, for politics, or, to get more involved in art or theater or dog walking, like whatever it may be? What's your advice for someone looking to live their dream? Well,
first of all, you can never start too young. There's no such thing. And it's also very rare that you don't have the resources to be working towards something. This past summer, I actually just counted right before I came up. I have 45 books on feminism in my room. And I started in June. Almost every paycheck, I would go on Amazon and I would buy at least one. And I would find them used, like old library copies written in whatever, for $1 with like $3.99 shipping. So I didn't have the resources to be in grad school. I didn't have the ability to be in a class or, whatever, or subscribe to or pay for anything regularly. But I was just reading on my own constantly.
Yeah.
And that has led to a lot of self-criticism and analysis. So first of all, track your progress. Like, start young. Track your progress as in like journal. Just write about what you're doing. But also don't set goals at first. When you're trying to reach any goal, don't track your progress. Like, write it down, but don't look back on it until a couple months down the road, and you'll be shocked by how much you've accomplished. And just talk to everybody and listen, really actually listen, and get rid of your ego. Your ego should be in the backseat, not behind the wheel. Because when you come from that place and when you come with defensiveness to someone who's just trying to have a conversation with you, nothing will get accomplished at all.
Right.
So start young, read everything. Read the masters of your craft, read the worst, read the criticism of both. And keep track of what you're doing, because it'll be cool to look back later and just see what you've done. But don't be too hard on yourself at first.
Right.
And listen. Like, listening is so much more important than talking.
Yeah.
The ironic blog owner and podcast speaker says, but...
No, I definitely agree. Listening is a gift, and the more you can listen, the further the ego recedes, and you're able to have a real conversation with somebody, which in this day and age, this political climate, is more important than anything. So thank you so much for the work you're doing, and thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's right.
So do you have any updates our listeners should know about?
We, on the podcast, we just came out with our 10th episode, which is crazy. And it's called Red, White Supremacy, and Blue, what we talk about when we talk about Super Bowl 51.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear that one.
Yeah. It goes into the alt-right and their response to Tom Brady, but also a little bit of the history of Super Bowl commercials and halftime shows. And what will be coming out this week is our 50 Shades Darker review.
Okay.
Because that's going to be a whole thing.
Nice.
But other than that, the podcast is always open to suggestions for things we should cover, and the blog is always looking for contributors. So if anyone hearing this has literally anything to say in any form, be it art, writing, whatever, theangryambisextress@gmail.com would be where you could contact us to submit.
Okay, great. And I know that you're pretty active on Instagram too. Could you give them your handle?
Yes, thanks. It's just at theangryambisextress.
Okay.
And on Twitter, it's the ambisextress. They wouldn't let me do too many characters, but that's the Instagram. Always sharing memes and connecting with other people. And speaking of young people, fascinating how many LGBT and feminist accounts are run by high schoolers. I've noticed since I got on there, which is so cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. The younger generation's really going to carry the flag for us, I'm sure. So to check out the Killjoy Agenda podcast, go to soundcloud.com/theangryambisextress to learn more. This has been an episode of Dreamcatchers. Thanks for listening, and remember to always keep dreaming.